The time I ruined my high school teacher's career and got her fired in the greatest way possible. This story is widely known amongst my family and is constantly brought up and joked about in my group of friends, even years later. A buddy of mine suggested that this is the perfect place to make it public. So let's get into this shitstorm. Backstory. I was a senior in high school at the time, and I had never been the brightest student. I was a solid C student, and I had never received a detention or had any kind of bad student record. This is important because to this day, I still have no idea why the teacher treated me this way. The teacher, whom we will name Mrs. Frank, had been a teacher there for more than a decade and was widely known for being a petty, heartless person who the administrators saw as the golden child. Mrs. Frank taught algebra, which is my worst subject, so naturally I had issues understanding the lessons and would ask questions frequently. To some, these questions are easily answered, but to me it was rocket science. Usually when someone asks a dumb question, no one should address it. However, in Mrs. Frank's case, she would belittle me in front of everyone by saying things such as, "And here comes the slow boy again. Wow, surprise, surprise, you don't understand it again. Really? We have to go extra slow for you today, don't we?" Etc., etc. I tried going to the administration about it before, but again, she was considered the golden child. They would send someone in to examine her during class. She would act respectful and normal for one day and go back to being a bunny the next. This goes on for about half the year until I had enough. I went to the local Radio Shack, bought a recorder, and secretly recorded every insult she would throw at me. I would sometimes try to make up for the lost time. Go ahead, feed the fire. Fast forward to the end of the year, and I'm sitting in Mrs. Frank's class when I ask a question. Her response, and I quote, because it's burned into my brain, was, "I've been teaching here for over 10 years, and that was the single dumbest question I've ever heard come from anyone's mouth." She continued the lesson without answering. I calmly stood up, packed up my stuff, and headed to the nurse's office to dismiss myself from school. We were allowed to dismiss ourselves if we were 18. I went home, compiled all of the brutal tapes into one glorious masterpiece, and headed back the next day to show the administrators. I sat down with the principal, and we listened to a couple of the insults before he stopped me. He wanted more witnesses present, as well as Mrs. Frank's. He told me we would meet the next day, where I could show him and the rest of the administrators the full tape. I walk into school the next morning, being the most nervous I've ever been for anything. I was called down to the office, where I met with some board directors, the local school police officer, the principal, the vice principal, and Mrs. Franks. What follows are some of the greatest minutes of my life. I watched as the administrators went from fed up with being in another useless meeting to furious and speechless, with some of them keeping their mouths open for the duration of the tape. I also watched Mrs. Frank go from confident and stuck up to her, realizing that she had fucked up beyond repair. She was publicly roasting herself in front of the most important people from the district. The tape ended, and without hesitation, the administrators looked around in astonishment, and the principal turned to me and said, "I think we have heard everything we need to, thank you." And I was quietly dismissed from the room. The final time I saw Mrs. Frank was leaving the room. I looked back and we made eye contact through her tear-filled eyes as I gave the biggest, most evil smile. I returned to class the next week and Mrs. Frank was nowhere to be found. The story spread quickly throughout the school and I was seen as a saint. I had successfully gotten her fired and made it almost impossible for Mrs. Frank to return to her teaching career, as well as cut off most of her connections with other teachers in the school. I had ruined her financially because no school district in the area would hire this walking piece of garbage. If you're reading this, Mrs. Frank, I'd like to take this moment to tell you to go fuck yourself. Edit 1. Should have cleared this up in the story. However, I didn't want to go into too much detail about the process. Yes, this was perfectly legal to do, and my parents and I did our research to make sure we weren't breaking any kind of law. In my state, you can record someone in their place of business without both parties' consent. Update 1. I believe this post became popular because almost everyone can relate to having a horrible teacher at one point in their life. I'm glad I could give some satisfaction to some of you who have had similar situations. Thank you for all the great feedback. I want to address some frequently asked questions. I regret sharing the dumbed-down version because I left out the amount of yaddy I put my parents through during all of this. Tons of meetings and phone calls that would have made the story a lot longer. And I didn't think anyone would enjoy reading it. 1. I still do not have the tapes. It was in the administration's best interest to keep them in case she sued for false termination, and it would have gotten out of hand if the tapes spread and given a bad reputation to the district. Even if I kept the tapes, this all took place over 15 years ago, and there's no way in hell I would be able to find them. 2. Yes, I took algebra as a senior because, again, I wasn't the greatest student to walk those halls. And throughout all my years of school, I had tutoring. I'm sorry, I'm not a genius. 3. I don't remember what question I asked that pushed me over the limit that day. Story 2. Title: Teacher makes false claim that I faked an injury, so my mom messes with her career. I apologize for the format. I'm typing this on my cracked phone screen. I, 15F, have had a long and elaborate history with injuries, especially breaking my arm. Starting from literally the day I was born, my health has been complicated. I have a few conditions, but none serious enough to impact my daily life as I know it. I have a very weak immune system and am prone to breaking bones. On top of that, I am the definition of clumsy, and I'm also a huge idiot who gets herself into dangerous situations for fun. My mom, 40F, has known me from birth and knows just the extent of my weird bad luck and health issues. I've broken my arms a collective 13 times over my entire life, and almost every time I got injured or sick, it seems somebody had something to say about it, IDKY. But teachers just love to say that students who get hurt often are attention-seeking fakers. And a lot of relationships with authority figures have been harmful because of this. Every time it's the same. For some reason, a teacher doesn't believe me. They call me a liar in front of everyone. I get bullied for a while, and then I have to try to prove that I'm not faking. I could post so many stories about teachers doing this, but this is a story about the time my mom managed to get revenge. This all took place around 7th grade. I was 12 at the time, and I had broken my wrist by climbing on top of something I wasn't supposed to and then falling off like a DE. My wrist was in a Velcro cast since I'm very allergic to the regular cast material, as they figured out through many cases of trial and error. My teacher, let's call her Mrs. Tablet since this took place while we were learning about Egyptian tablets. She taught history, and our personalities clashed a bit. I'm more of a creative, adventurous, free thinker type, and she was very conservative, by the book, and proper. We hadn't had any real issues before this, but we just didn't mesh well. She was absent one day, and we had a sub in. I knew the sub as one of my teacher's friends and one of my bully's moms. I didn't like her, but I was still respectful in class and just tried to get my work done. She got me in trouble for doodling on my paper once or twice, but other than that, everything was fine. Or so I thought. The next day, I went into class as usual. We were working on an assignment about Egypt and its tables when Mrs. Tablet called me over to her desk. I went over, thinking she'd just get onto me for drawing on the back of my homework or something, only to get bombarded with a bunch of really weird questions. The interaction went something like, "Teacher, so, Fire, do you know why I've called you up here? I know Fire isn't my Reddit name, but it's my IRL nickname, so I'm using it here." Me, "No ma'am, I can't say that I do." "Teacher, how long have you had that cast?" Me, "About a week now, why?" "Teacher, do you need that cast?" Me, yes." "Teacher, well, the substitute told me she saw you take it off." Me, "It's a cast, I can't take it off, it would hurt." "Teacher, so if I asked the class, they'd say you need that cast." Me, "Yes." "Teacher, and if I called your parents right now, they'd say the same thing." Me, "Yes, they were the ones who took me to the hospital." And she did this in front of the whole class. I was eventually dismissed, and people looked at me weirdly for the rest of the class. As I later learned, apparently the substitute had told Mrs. Tablet that I'd taken off my cast as soon as I left class. I didn't. And that I threw it in my locker like, ha ha ha, I'm getting away with doing less work. Less. So basically, she pretended I was a bad guy in a crappy high school movie. IDK why she said this, but it had my teacher convinced that I was a liar and a fake. I technically could remove my cast since it was Velcro, but that would have been extremely painful. And it's not like I could just walk around without it. I wasn't going to make a big deal about it at the time, but it turns out she was serious about calling my parents. But she made the mistake of calling my mom. Now, my mother and I don't have a perfect relationship. She has anger issues, so we don't always get along well. But she loves me very much and doesn't let people like this mess with me if she can stop it. According to my mom, Mrs. Tablet called her all cocky and said things like, "Apparently your daughter is wearing a cast, did you know that?" And, well, we all know how dramatic teenage girls can be, especially unique kids like her. She even threatened to have me suspended before my mom stopped her and tore her to shreds for talking about her child like that. I don't think I'm allowed to repeat what was said, but By the end, Mrs. Tablet had to retreat with her tail tucked between her legs. She started being even colder to me after that day and started giving me unfair detentions for not sitting still and doodling on the side of my worksheets. Even then, outside of school, we went to the same art studio sometimes. Weird that someone who hates art so much likes to paint, and poisoned the art director against me and got me put into a lower class. When my mom found out about this, she started the real revenge. My mom has never been a PTA mom. She honestly can't stand most of the PTA members, and their kids are chosen as favorites at my school and use this power to bully others, including me and my friends. My mom is, however, friends with a very lovely woman on the county school board, which has more power than the PTA. She told her friend everything that had happened and supplied all the doctor's notes needed to prove that I needed my cast. Her friend managed to convince the rest of the board that Mrs. Tablet was discriminating against an impaired student, given her comments about me being slower at work and just wearing the cast to slack off, along with detentions related to me not sitting still when she knew I had nervous movements and slight ADHD. At the art studio, my mother pulled me from the classes. I took it upon myself to inform the fellow kids about why, and rumors spread quickly. Soon enough, kids were getting pulled left and right, and my art teacher was pulling at strings to try to get the situation under control. I think the studio went into temporary closure before reopening again. She was suspended for a week to go under investigation, and it turns out she treated a lot of the unique, as she put it, students in a similar way. She was verbally reprimanded by 2 different departments, and instead of getting her standard raise over the next 3 years, she'll only get half of that. Not only that, but she had to retake a course on how to properly treat students, and if she's ever caught crossing this line again, she'll lose tenure. She'll just be getting her bonus back at the start of next school year, and I'd just like to say that I hope she learned her lesson. Story 3. An entitled teacher takes medicine from me in class. I saw a similar story on Reddit and thought about sharing my experience of when in high school, my 16 female medicine was taken by my math teacher, 42 male, during class. Now, this happened a few years ago as I've already graduated and yada yada, but that's not what y'all are here for. The story took place during school hours in math class. I have severe anxiety mixed with severe ADHD and high-spectrum autism, which creates pretty nasty anxiety attacks, due to which I have to take a specific medication to calm down my anxiety when I start shaking. The symptoms are pretty easy to tell. Feels like my heart's imploding, hard to breathe, paranoia, shaking, and then I start uncontrollably crying. It's not that hard to set off one of these attacks due to PTSD from the past, but you can find one of those stories in my profile. Some of the big triggers are yelling, throwing, and chasing, or in this case, angry speedwalking. Due to being easy to set off, I keep a bottle in my bag labeled for use anytime necessary. Though I can only use this medication twice a day within a specific period from the separate dosages. I'd already taken the first dosage earlier before school to prepare myself for a stressful day. But during my class, I started feeling that familiar tightness in my chest and tried breathing exercises to help myself calm down. Something you should know about this teacher. He hates kids interrupting the lesson for any reason. He will hand out detention like they're lottery cards, even if you just ask to use the bathroom. It's ridiculous, honestly, and he's had lots of complaints to no avail. Another thing, he's very loud. Not necessarily because he chooses to be, but he's got a very loud voice, which I guess was setting me off that day. Now I would have been able to manage if he'd just let me get some water. But when I asked if I could get a drink, he looked at me with a scowl. "Oh, and what makes you think that you get to skip my lesson?" he said in an accusatory tone. "What?" No, sir, I just need a drink for my medication." I was already nervous to begin with, but he was more annoyed that I wanted to leave the classroom to take necessary medication than he was about my health and safety. He knew I had medication, but didn't let me bring water bottles to class, so I usually had to wait until after class to get any type of drink if I needed my medicine. "Your medication can wait. You're fine now. Sit down and be quiet," he snapped. And yes, he said it as if he were accusing me of faking the medicine. Thankfully, my best friend was also in the class and had no filter for herself, but had the amazing power of, "I don't give a crap." She stood up noticing that I was starting to panic and tossed her pencil up front. "She needs her medicine, you dumb. If you think she's faking, then you're as dense as a Dacoy's brick and should go live a life as one." This pissed him off and he started yelling at her. Much as I care about my friend, the yelling only served to trigger me. And I dug out the bottle ready to down a pill dry just to stop myself from having an attack in front of my classmates. He apparently didn't like this and walked over and snatched the bottle before I could get the lid off, and then went to his desk while my friend tried to get it back. And then he locked it in his desk. There is no Dachshund reason for you to be filling your pathetic brain with these lies about anxiety issues. You're just wanting to get high or eat in my class. I started freaking out and screamed at him. It's not a lie, I need those. Give it back. No, now sit down. You both will be having after-school detention. After that, my attack happened. I don't usually remember what happens during the attack, but according to my friend, I pushed the desk over in the chair and fell to the floor crying, and when the teacher tried to come and make me stand, saying, "You're faking it, you little lying brat," I scratched the fuck out of his arm in a panic. A kid in my class ran to get the principal, who then came to the class and had the teacher unlock his desk, despite not wanting to, and was forced to give the medicine back. My parents were called, and they were understandably furious. They demanded that action be taken and threatened a lawsuit, which, considering they've done it in the past, I'm sure they would do it again. They brought me home after taking me to the hospital to make sure I didn't hurt myself, and my teacher was put on unpaid suspension and was forced to take classes about being more understanding and about medical awareness. He was made to apologize, but he mostly sounded sorry for himself and not about what he did. I was put into a different class as I refused to see him again, although I wasn't able to have my medicine bottle in my bag anymore, but I could go to the nurse up to 2 times a day if I needed it. And the teachers were all made aware that if I needed my medicine, that they had to catch me up on anything I missed later, or give me resources for it, and that they couldn't tell me to wait or do it after class. They were mostly understanding, and I had a pretty rough end of year. But after that year at that high school, my parents had enough of the issues and put me into at-home online schooling to finish my last 2 school years, which was great. Nowadays, my anxiety isn't as bad as it was, as I've gone to a lot of therapy and psychiatry appointments. People honestly need to be more aware. Anxiety isn't a joke, and people get hurt from attacks. Edit. I won't specify location, but I'm seeing a lot about how medications should have been locked in the nurse's office. Well, I'm not sure about the rest of you, but where I went to school, they only did that with refrigerator medications or spare medicine. If you had a doctor's note stating the kind of medication, like how mine is to be taken, if I feel a panic attack happening, then they were fine allowing you to have them on your person. After this, however, that changed, and they started enforcing a policy that only EPIs or life-saving medications could be kept on your person. There was always a nurse on staff in the office so that the medication was never out of reach, and if there was not one, then one of the office workers or principals had keys to access the medicine.